hearing. Moving on now to policy 5, which relates to carbon reduction, community energy networks, sustainable design, construction and water use.
Mr. Lewis, can I just come in briefly? Just to say that 116 under design, we'll pick up the modifications right at the end. We'll wrap them up at the end. We won't do them after each policy.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Okay, so policy 5, start with the council explaining the evidence for the tidal water efficiency standards for new dwellings that are proposed, specifically the evidence relating to the plan area.
Okay, so the primary justification for this policy requirement is advice we've received from Anglian Water Services, and it's at least in part set out in the joint advice to local planning authorities on optional higher water efficiency standard for new housing produced by Anglian Water, the Environment Agency and Natural England, which is appended to Anglian Water's response to the round 2 consultation. I think that's PS 253. And it states that their region is water stressed, and that the tighter standard should therefore be applied, and the policy 5 includes wording recommended in the joint advice, and also just to add to that, this policy provision is also noted in the Habitats Regulations assessment for the plan as forming part of the mitigation for the impact of development on the SPA.
The requirement, then, the council's evidencing the requirement based on the needs of the wider area beyond the boundaries of the planned area. So the Anglian water area per se is water stressed.
Yes, sir. Yeah, the advice we were given in reasonably strong terms at round 1 and round 2 stages was that we should definitely be including this advice, and so we have in the policy. We felt that that was an appropriate response to that request.
Can I be a bit more specific? I think having looked at the study, it refers to an area that was new to me, which is the Rutherford North Resource Zone.
Yes.
And is that analogous to the old Northampton borough boundaries, or
it's somewhat larger? That's my understanding.
Right.
So yeah.
Because it talk, and again, if you can help me with this, it talks about that being in surplus through the forecast period. Does that mean that Rutherford North Resource Zone is not itself water stressed, but it's the actual extent of the Anglian Water Company's area that's water stressed? Because that's massive.
Yeah, that is my understanding. So yeah.
So is there any further evidence around the water stressed nature of the Rutherford North Resource Zone when it appears that is in surplus and doesn't have that issue?
Not that I'm aware of, sir. No.
Mrs. Green,
thank you, sir. Yes, our point was that the Anglian water area covers an extensive area, and that we didn't feel that the council had actually demonstrated a local need specific to Northampton. And also really just to point out that under the building regs, new development has a mandatory requirement for 125 litres per person per day, which is already a higher standard than would be found amongst the existing stock. So, so the new build is already making a contribution towards water efficiency. in the mandatory standard and to go to the optional standard. Council really does need to demonstrate a local need, which we don't feel has been done.
Turning to the council, you mentioned about the impact regulation assessment conclusions. What, if any, will be the implications for those were we to disagree with the council and we were to agree with Mrs. Green? That it shouldn't be imposed for the plan area.
I think that the point that was made in the HRA was essentially that because it's going to have some sort of impact, I imagine, on something like water table, but I don't know the specifics. It was quite a passing reference in that document.
Yeah, the issue I'd written down there, was it about abstraction? In other words, water levels in the SPA, or was it about water treatment? In other words, release of water. What was the effect? I think that was what I was keen to know more about.
Yeah, I don't think that's entirely clear in the HRA.
Turning to Mr. Green, have you got any more points on this issue of water standards?
Thank you.
Mr. Sturgis?
No, I haven't.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the second point we have about policy 5. It's the requirement for sustainable construction methods. Really wondering what are meant by sustainable construction methods, and would they be suitable, say, for historic buildings, talking about different materials, etc. And the final point is really, are the list of quality criteria wandering into an area that's covered by the building regulations, going beyond the land use planning?
Okay, I think that in terms of sustainable construction methods, this is about the wider sort of environmental concerns about construction and the wider sort of aspirations of the plan in terms of carbon emissions and so on, and being sustainable and just ensuring that things like the embodied energy used in that's created in new build is kept at a reasonably low level. There are policies that protect heritage assets and so on, and clearly that's something that would have to be taken into the balance of any renovation or refurbishment work on listed buildings or other heritage assets.
So I'm wondering what is required from development proposals in having to adopt sustainable construction methods, exactly what is meant there. I mean, would it be clear to a decision maker as to whether the scheme is compliant with that or not?
I think it's perhaps something we need to look further into, sir. But it's something that we feel is important, as I say, in terms of reducing the impact of development on the wider environment.
Green, do you have any comments on that aspect of the policy?
Our point wasn't so much on sustainable construction. It was about the bullet points about energy efficiency, which again is a little bit ambiguous. And of course, things have moved on substantially since the policy was first drafted. With the government's proposed changes to Part L and F of the building regulation and the roadmap to future home standard in 2025. And we thought for effectiveness, we thought it should be clearer that developments that conform with the building regs would meet council requirements under policy 5.
Well, at the moment, and we are waiting for changes to the building regulations, and there's
Yes,
changes to legislation that may or may not happen. The council is able to set its own standards, and you're not proposing to do that through this plan, either set your own energy efficiency standards or standards for renewable energy sources. So is the policy as it's worded at the moment, is it just really seeking to encourage the use of, rather than compel use of? Is that fair reading?
In as much as we're not actually setting standards, yes, sir.
Okay. I take the point about the potential changes. Well, according to potential changes to building regulations, they are promised, and that they haven't appeared yet. There've been several forms of consultation held, isn't there? It could indeed change prior to the conclusion of this examination. And so it's one, I think, to keep an eye on.
Yes.
We have the comments and we'll take those away, but it may be that changes to the building regulations would render the bullet point surplus to requirements anyway.
Yes. Yes, sir.
The latest thing I've read is that the changes were going to be introduced this year. We're still in this year, so we'll see. I did ask the department when they're going to introduce them, but didn't get an answer.
Is it a calendar year, a financial year, or?
Well, it actually says in the response to the consultation on the future building standards that we're 2021. But things are moving on, I think, as well. There's a lot of policy development going on there, and following the COP26, etc. So we will see. Anything else to add, Mrs. Green, on that? Just bear with us a moment, or we'll just have a look through the agenda and then move forward to. So on the list of policies that got use, so this is 29, 32, 34, 35, 36, 37, is that right? Wondering whether to start from 27 and do an actual build plan and just go through to. Okay, so if people are content then, I suggest we through to policy 27 and look forward from there, and then cover the policies that Mr. Green wants to.
Mr. Green, Mr. 27 's the next one that you were interested in.
29.
Yeah.
We start at 27.
Right,
then
okay. Okay, fine, we'll do that. Yeah. So we'll do the built-in natural environment. F. So if we start there, that will then cover the HBF ones as well as we work through them.
Okay.
So under policy 27 then, we posed a question: what is the justification for 15 dwellings threshold for housing development, and why does the threshold only apply to housing development? So if you can help me with that, that'd be great.
I'm going to pass you on to my colleague Amanda Jacobs on this one, sir.
Hello, thank you. The submitted local plan part 2 did contain a threshold of 15 dwellings, but we are seeking to change that to align it with the MPPF, and that's through main modification 13D. It was originally 15 dwellings because that's the threshold that the green infrastructure, the Northampton Green Infrastructure Plan used at the time. But as I say, yes, we are seeking to amend that through a main modification so that all major developments will be required to provide green infrastructure.
And that links to the standard definition of major that's in the...
Yes, it does,
Yeah.
in the MPPF.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good, thanks. And then the next one is the policy consistent with paragraph 174 of the framework MPPF in regard to net gains for biodiversity. I mean, probably the issue I'm concerned with here is, should the policy specifically refer to all schemes and not just those identified as major?
I mean, at the moment, yeah, it's consistent. Policy 27 is consistent with paragraph 174 of the MPPF as it requires major developments as proposed to be changed. We're proposing a main modification 13D. That's for green infrastructure projects. With regards to biodiversity net gain, we deal with that through policy 29, which is proposed to be split into two policies, 29A and 29B. And we are seeking to just and with regards to biodiversity net gain, we will be requiring all development proposals to provide a net gain in biodiversity, and that's proposed through main modification 14.
And that's part of policy 29.
And that's part of policy 29A.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah. I remember the discussion on splitting the policy
Yeah.
last time. Yeah. Yeah. And then the final one, would the policy be effective with regard to blue infrastructure, which I think is water?
Yes, but to just strengthen that, we are proposing main modification 13E to include the word blue, so it's clear that it's not just green infrastructure, it's blue infrastructure.
Thanks for that. I've got no more points on that. So moving on to the next one, which is the policy 28, providing public open space. Again, if we can just run through the questions in the main mods, in the questions. What is the justification of the planning standard for new development set out in policy 28?
The piece of evidence that sets out the justification for the open space requirements is the Open Space Sport and Recreation Report, which is evidence-based document 14/01.
I think I'm comfortable with the answer for 150. But in terms of the 151, given the findings of the HRA and to be effective, should the policy refer to provision of suitable alternative natural green space for SANG requirements? I think this has been answered in the written statement, but just to be clear, a SANG is also open space which should add to the overall provision. Is that how you're reading it as well?
Well, it could be. It's not an existing typology in the open space evidence report. That deals with amenity green space, natural and semi-natural green space, and parks and gardens. So this would be a new typology, albeit...
Yeah. But again, I was looking at those illustrative drawings that were supplied as part of the evidence when we talked about SANGs in terms of the LAA 1098, Green Great Haddon. If you looked at sort of dog walking off leashes and all that sort of stuff, it all seemed to me to add to the general quantum of open space within the area.
I mean, our position at the moment is we don't consider that Policy 28 needs to refer to SANG because it's a bespoke item that is part of Site 1098 under Policy 41.
So it's specific to that.
Yeah, but it's that's our position at the moment.
Lewis?
We had some discussions, didn't we, about SANG, and you explained the requirements are considered on a sort of site-by-site basis. It is a form of open space, and we were thinking in terms of SANG whether there should be some sort of reflection within this, even on the basis that it will be dealt with on a site-by-site basis. And so the quantity might vary, but the maximum distance, I think, is probably a consideration in the provision of SANG, in terms of, because that's we discussed about walking distances and necessity of SANG. And I think that it needs to be reflected in the plan somewhere, and either within what the policy will come on to about later on, or within this is providing open spaces, because it is going to be a significant form of additional open space provided within the former borough area.
Okay.
It did move. So can we note that as something to use to take sensibly as a potential?
So yes, we will. Yeah, I think the council position is maybe policy 30 is the better place. Policy 28, it'd be difficult to incorporate it given the introductory wording to policy 28, because not all new major developments will have to provide SANG, so that's the difficulty. But maybe we can look at policy 30.
Okay, thank you.
We'll move on to policy 29, supporting and enhancing biodiversity. In terms of question 152, obviously we read the main modifications, seen them the last time. The point we had was where the policy has to have regard to the biodiversity SPD, which obviously we haven't seen yet, and it's really about what comes first. And making sure that policy 29 doesn't repeat the requirements of policy 30. Have we got any comments on that? Mr. Lewis, you were discussed this one.
Well, I can councillor suggesting a number of changes to the policy, and I think so maybe it'd be helpful if you could explain those.
Okay.
And again, there's repetition of what we raised earlier about not repeating other policies from the policy.
Yes, the council is proposing main modification 14, and that is proposing to split policy 29 into policies 29A and 29B. Policy 29A is supporting enhancing biodiversity, and it requires all development to provide a net gain in biodiversity, and that can be incorporating on-site or off-site. Proposal should enhance natural capital and be designed around the existing components of the ecological network. I won't read out all of the policy. And applicants are expected to assess the impact of their proposal on biodiversity using a DEFRA biodiversity calculator. Developments that do not achieve biodiversity net gain and fragments habitats and links will be refused. Policy 29B focuses on nature conservation, so seeks to maintain and enhance biodiversity, geodiversity. It takes you through the mitigation hierarchy as set out in the MPPF. We do discuss a proposal should comply with the principles set out in the Northamptonshire Biodiversity SPD, and I understand that that's what HBF commented on.
Yes, and we'll bring in Mr. Green in a moment, but
Okay.
as with a number of other references to other documents that aren't part of the development plan, because they're not part of this plan, you shouldn't. There's a question of soundness. If there's an attempt made to try to afford them development plan status, but they're not actually part of the development plan. So the normal approach we would be advocating would be, shall refer to or have regard to principles.
Yes.
Unless the principles are set out within the document. But that could mean a major piece of work and further consultation in order to do that, because that wasn't the policy that was originally set out. Let me bring in Mrs. Green at this point.
Yes, thanks, sir. In our pre-submission consultation, our general point was that policy should be consistent with the Environment Act. And then with regards to the main modification 14, yes, we picked up on bullet point 2 of policy 29B and the referencing to the SPD. And our point was that the SPD is not policy, it is only guidance. And we didn't feel that the wording was appropriate and that it could be interpreted as giving development plan status to the SPD.
Yes, so following on from HBF's comments and your previous comments, I think, I've sort of drafted a potential further mod that I think needs to go into policy 29B. Obviously I'll need to speak to colleagues about it and come back to you, but I think we can change that to ensure that it's not referencing something that doesn't have development plan status.
Yeah, I think, just to repeat, I suppose what Mr. Lewis said, it's modifying it so it says have regard to rather than or the more difficult one, which would be to incorporate some of the criteria in the SPD in the policy, which has got a lot more implications for the council.
Yeah, I've done some suggested wording, so I'll run that past the team and provide that.
Okay, the other point we had on the suggested change to 29, suggested 29B is this reference to, is it necessary to actually refer to the Nen Valley gravel pits as part of policy in that way? There's this point that perhaps needs to be making, whether just say that the policies or all proposals that may cause adverse effects to the Nen Valley gravel pits will be considered against policy 30. It's sort of repeating.
I mean, are you suggesting that we could remove that text?
Yeah.
Because, I think we would need to discuss, but yeah.
Mrs. Green, any other comments on policy 29?
No further comment.
Thank you.
Which I think does then bring us on to policy 30, the Upper Nen Valley gravel pit special protection area. Again, it's one of these policies that refers to an SPD, and it's the same point that we made. Does it need to include the criteria from the SPD in the policy, or is it a case, as we discussed before, of the policy being modified so it has regard to the SPD? Again, it was the point I think Ms. Green made that the SPD hasn't got the same weight as a development plan policy, and we're going to go down into that sort of territory.
I think we can take a look at that and re-amend and update the modification. Yeah.
Mr. Lewis, have you got any further points?
No, I think it might be a consistent comment. On other policies.
There will be others that we come to on that. I haven't got the policy. That's my main one.
What about the wording of military bird surveys, just for requirement? On sites to do the surveys. I think it's the surveys need to be done.
Yes.
Just sort of clarity of the wording, we need to think about the effect of the wording.
So moving on then to policy 31, the protection and enhancement of designated and non-designated heritage assets. Again, we're going to be like a broken record up here. This is a similar point about where the policy refers to being consistent with the guidance from Historic England and best practice. Again, they're not part of the development plan for the area, and therefore is a modification necessary to ensure that it's about having regard to this, or including some of those best practice criteria or English heritage guidance in the policy.
Okay, we have formulated policy 31, taking into account the best practice contained in the guidance. Historic England has considered this policy to be sound when they submitted their responses to the proposed submission round 2 consultation. We have, however, reviewed the policy and accept that maybe the best place for the reference to this guidance should be in the justification text. We are considering a proposed modification 22A to remove the last bullet point of policy 31 and add it to paragraph 1026. 10.26.
Okay, I think that certainly helps me in terms of the point I was raising. I think there is I suppose, a consistency point when we're, as we're referring to quite a few of these policies, which have references to other documents, and it's whether, rather than simply remove it and put it in the explanatory text,